That's not a virus. It's the grammar of money. It's been deleted.
This is gonna sound crazy, but I need you to imagine something. Like really feel it. It was a Tuesday. They called it Black Tuesday, but not for the reason you're thinking. There was no crash, just a click. See, the best explanation we ever got, and it's more of a ghost story really, was from the few network admins who weren't institutionalized by the shock of it. They said it was like a code that had always been there, buried in the deepest layer of every single financial operating system on the planet. Like a logic bomb, but one that didn't destroy the hardware. It just rewrote the rules. At precisely 9 a.m. Eastern, it executed. Its only command: set value equals null. It wasn't an EMP. It wasn't a hack in the old sense. It was a kill switch for the very idea of digital accounting. Every database storing a monetary figure, from the Federal Reserve servers to the app tracking your coffee points, had its core definition of currency invalidated. The numbers turned to linguistic gibberish. It wasn't a virus you could fight. It was the grammar of money itself, deleted. Paper cash? Yeah, it was still there, sitting in vaults, stuffed in mattresses. But here's the cruel twist. With no central bank to back it, no system to define its worth against anything else, that green paper was just fancy printed material. You couldn't take it anywhere and demand goods because nobody knew what to demand. $1,000 for a loaf of bread? Why? Says who? The authority was gone. Gold? Silver? They had value as shiny, durable objects. But their price? That was a fairy tale from the old world. The reset wasn't just digital. It was conceptual. The trigger was the code. The consequence was the total collapse of shared financial faith. And that faith was the real infrastructure. When it vanished, we were standing on air. The silence was the worst part. No market news. No beeping transaction alerts. Just a global, baffled quiet, broken by the slow-motion shattering of things we took for granted. For 3 days, it was pure, chaotic barter. And it was ugly. Forget a case of water for a toolbox. I saw a fistfight break out in a parking lot over a single gallon of gas. The threat wasn't monsters. It was the death of trust. Your neighbor wasn't your neighbor anymore. He was a stranger who might have something you needed, and you had zero framework for a fair exchange. Historians later compared it to the worst periods of hyperinflation like Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe, but on steroids. At least then, the paper had some agreed-upon, if absurd, number. We had nothing. You survived by hoarding what you could carry and by forming tiny, paranoid pods, usually around family or the few people you truly, viscerally trusted. My apartment building became a fortress of suspicion. We pooled canned food behind a locked door on the 3rd floor, with a rotation of people guarding it. Not from mythical raiders, but from the desperate family on the 5th floor. The brutal truth that punched us in the face that first week? The market value of everything was now dictated by 2 things only: immediate need and who had the biggest stick to defend their pile. My career in digital ad analytics wasn't just useless. It was a punchline. The guys who knew how to pick a lock, or who had a basement full of camping gear, or who were just physically intimidating. They were the new aristocracy. After a month, the geography of power redrew itself in blood and wire. The Lakeside Collective I mentioned? I romanticized it. Let me be blunt. It wasn't founded by idealists. It was seized. A former logistics manager named Karina commandeered a lakeside warehouse district. She had a group of ex-security contractors and, crucially, a working ham radio. She didn't ask people to join. She offered protection from the even more violent gangs roaming the suburbs in exchange for absolute labor. You farmed her gardens. You stood watch on her walls. She paid you in food ration chits that were only good inside her territory. It was a company town, born in a month, and it was one of the better outcomes. Other zones fell to different types, some to religious fervor, promising order in exchange for obedience. Others just devolved into constant, low-level skirmishing over a working well. Disease, the old killer we'd forgotten, came roaring back. A simple wound could fester. The flu could sweep through a cramped settlement. Medicine was the ultimate currency, and it was held by the new lords. My unexpected advantage? A weird one. I understood networks. Not computers anymore, but human ones. I saw how Karina's system worked. It was a crude, brutal recreation of feudalism. I made myself useful not by farming, but by becoming her recorder. I tracked the ration chits, the inventory, the labor shifts, kept me fed. It also made me complicit. That was the second brutal truth. In the scramble to survive, moral lines didn't just blur. They were erased. You traded pieces of your conscience for safety day by day. By the year mark, a few stable, ruthless systems had crystallized. Karina's territory, now called Lakeside, had expanded. Her chits had evolved. They were stamped metal now, issued for a day's labor. They could be traded for specific goods. A food chit, a clinic chit. It was a closed-loop economy with her at the top. It was stable. It was also a cage. But here's where human ingenuity, or stubbornness, flickered back. In the cracks between these new mini-states, a gray market emerged. It worked like the barter systems that sprung up in besieged Sarajevo. People traded skills directly. A mechanic might fix a water pump for a community in exchange for a future share of their vegetables. It was inefficient, but it was based on real, measurable value, not Karina's decrees. Information became a dark currency. Maps of clean water sources, schematics for rainwater catchments, medical guides painstakingly copied by hand. These were traded in whispers. The biggest threat was no longer chaos. It was consolidation. It was the fear that one of these petty states would gather enough force to swallow the others, and then you'd be back to ancient history. A king on a hill with everyone else as serfs. The war wasn't for resources anymore. It was for the right to define the new rules. A decade later, the world is a patchwork. You have the chit dominions like Lakeside, efficient but authoritarian. You have free towns that run on complicated, time-based labor trade webs, constantly negotiating. You have archive monasteries in old university towns, where knowledge is preserved and traded cautiously. And you have vast, silent, dead zones, where the fighting was too fierce and the land too poisoned. We didn't become careful stewards. Some of us did. The free towns try. But the dominions? They strip their lands for fuel and lumber, because their stability depends on constant growth, on having more than their rivals. The old pattern is reasserting itself, just with different tokens. Humans didn't change. The system did. We filled the vacuum with what we always have: hierarchy, trade, violence, and occasional fragile cooperation. My job? I'm a system tracker for a free town. I analyze the flows of goods and labor, trying to keep our tiny web of trust from snapping. I use the same pattern recognition skills I used to sell sneakers online. The irony isn't lost on me. What did we learn? We learned that money wasn't the root of all evil. It was a technology, a tool to manage the evil, the greed, the fear, the violence that's already in us. Take the tool away and those impulses don't vanish. They just find new, cruder instruments. The reset didn't purify humanity. It stripped us bare. And what was underneath wasn't angels or monsters. It was just people. Desperate, clever, cruel, kind, resourceful, selfish people trying to build a new grammar from the ashes of the old. We didn't find freedom. We found different chains. Some lighter, some heavier. The ghost of that Tuesday morning code still haunts us. Because the real question it asked wasn't, what if money disappeared? It was, what's left of you when it does? So look at your wallet. Go ahead. Look at the cards, the cash. That's not just paper and plastic. That's a shared dream, a collective hallucination of staggering power, fragile beyond belief. And the only thing keeping it real is all of us agreeing that it is. Kinda makes you hold it a little differently, doesn't it? If that agreement ever broke, what do you have in your two hands and in your heart that's truly yours to trade?